Next up, we have Remi Kanazi. Remi Kanazi is a Palestinian-American poet who came through spoken word through activism, which of course is something we always love to hear. He's traveled all over the country and all over the world doing his poetry. In fact, he just got back from an exhaustive tour of the UK, right? And he's here with us today, and he's also, we were talking, and he's also a person who doesn't want to just perform and leave, like he wants to engage and talk to you. He's a tremendous artist activist that we have a ton of respect for, and again, we're really glad that his first performance in Minnesota is with us on a snowy Saturday. So Minnesota, show your love for Remi Kanazi.
All right, you guys are all lovely and active. Like, here's the weird thing. I just did 23 shows in England, and if they like something, they don't like hoot and holler. They clap longer, which is kind of weird. It's like a British thing. It's like pip pip cheerio. Okay, I didn't really know what the hell was going on. They don't actually say that. That's Oliver Twist. You look like an asshole when you say that to somebody in the UK. But whatever. I'm going to be like super angry, but I was in a couple comedy festivals. I think I'm funny, but I'm not, so bear with me. Let me tell you a little bit about me before I do a poem. I grew up in a small town in western Massachusetts. I have been in New York City for the last 11 years. In that small town in western Massachusetts, there were 9,000 people. Of those 9,000 people, 8,990 of them were white. I was also a fat child with one eyebrow and went to Catholic school, so I wasn't really kicking game on the playground. What made it more awkward is my mom was Palestinian, and she was like really proud to be Palestinian, and what the icing on the obnoxious cake was she was really proud to be Palestinian in public, which scared the shit out of all the little white children in the neighborhood. And people would be like, "Hey, does your mom hide bombs in the basement?" And I would say, "I don't think so." But I haven't actually checked this week. So anyway, this has nothing to do whatsoever with the first poem I'm going to do. But when I first started writing, it was like identity pieces, right? I moved to New York City 4 months before 9/11. That wasn't awkward. So I was writing about Middle East politics, and then my brother and sister took me to go see Def Poetry Jam in 2004. And that was the first time I saw like Suhair Hamed and all these other poets. Yeah. Always clapping for Suhair. And it was the first time I had seen spoken word before. Now, I was coming up through like leftist activism and going to rallies and not really through like traditional, what would be considered traditional spoken word. But it was beautiful to find this medium, because I always consider myself a political activist who uses art as a medium to get their message across. The first poem I'm going to do is actually called Home. It's an identity piece, but I wrote it later along in my journey. I didn't grow up in a refugee camp. My grandparents are refugees from 1948. My grandmother was 7 months pregnant with my mother when she was kicked out of Jaffa. My father was 2 years old when they fled to Lebanon. And so for me, growing up in western Massachusetts, there was an immense amount of privilege. My dad was a doctor. I didn't have to struggle like at any point of my childhood. But it was because of that. It was because of learning about the civil rights movement and the anti-apartheid struggle and police brutality within my own community when I moved to New York City that it made me want to fight back twice as much. Because the reality is that, you know, if you want universal health care that's actually single payer, if you want military aid to end to despotic regimes or Israel, you have to, which I'm a huge fan of, because we'll talk about that in a couple poems, whatever. I'm sorry, my family was the indigenous population. So this poem is called Home, and it's about me growing up in western Massachusetts. Apartheid regimes are a lot like despotic regimes. They get along. So do empires. It's really weird being in the fallen empire, which is England, and then like coming back to the existing one. You'll get used to it. It's okay. Now I feel like I should start angry. This is an identity piece. I didn't grow up in a refugee camp. I grew up here, comfortable, able not to know or care, choose my own destination, close the book, turn off the TV, forget the stories. A gay man once asked me, why do you give a damn about Palestine? Why not, I replied. Why did men and women clench fists and fight back at the Stonewall, push through Matthew Shepard hate crime legislation in Congress? I care about Palestine for the same reason I get emotional watching Schindler's List. Still can't comprehend why kids in my neighborhood picked on Michael Paul for being Jewish. Was 10 years old the first time someone called me a sand nigger. And I don't hate the town I grew up in, but I don't forget those experiences either. The way white women on the block talk down on my brown mother. Don't forget the stories. Pretend it didn't happen. Don't feel the need to dream up an alternative American childhood. As if it's vision ever intended to include me. People fight back because they identify. My grandmother still fills tear ducts with longing memories of Jaffa, a home we in America take for granted. I don't ask anyone to forget about the Holocaust or feel as Jewish because they grew up on Long Island. Not gonna have someone tell me where my loyalties lie because my physical environment should define who I am. Remembrance is part of action. Never again applies to many people's yes, I'm a product of America, but no less Palestinian. Palestine, being that fight for freedom and justice, not just low valleys, beautiful sunsets, and fig trees, not just my grandparents' house in Jaffa that's still standing, not just a place I nervously visited, could barely catch a cab in Arabic, yet welcomed like they were expecting my return. Home, in the realest sense. I'm Palestinian. I was born in America. That is who I am. I mean, I was saying before, I think it's important to talk about empire. I think it's important to talk about colonialism and fallen empires. And when I'm meeting with students in the UK, and I'm like, you don't think that your cuts in the Labour Party and the Tory Party trashing your national healthcare system has anything to do with the war in Afghanistan, but it has everything to do with drone bombing different countries, with funding, whether it's Predator drones or it's funding tanks or F-16s or dropping cluster bombs and white phosphorus on civilian populations. The reality is that we colonize abroad, we bomb abroad, we set up proxy forces abroad, and we bring that same shit home. So if you look at our stock market bubble and then our housing crisis and now the student debt crisis, unemployment just dropped from 9.1% to 8.6%, but it's because people stopped looking for jobs. It's not because it dropped. It's not because somebody was like, you know what, I'm going to hire 500,000 people today. No, I'm not going to tell anybody about it. So this next poem, I'm going to do this next. It's called Revolution, and I wrote this after the fall of Israel's great ally, Hosni Mubarak, and I'm considered a brash poet. I don't really mind putting my feelings out there. I'm not a fan of Jim Crow. I'm not a fan of apartheid. I don't want to drink at a separate water fountain, and I don't want to call something a democracy when it's not. Palestinians are relegated to third-class status inside of the state of Israel. More than 20 different laws, right? More than 30 different laws, rather. If 4 million people are living under occupation, this is something that I'm going to fundamentally fight against. I don't care if it's Egypt. I don't care if it's Tunisia. I don't care if it's the U.S.-Mexico border or Barack Obama, the change candidate, kicking out 400,000 undocumented people this year. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Or not closing down Guantanamo, attacking our civil liberties, and drone bombing 6 different countries. But this next poem was called Revolution, and there were a lot of Arab American parents that kind of felt like, you know what, forget about it, keep your head down, keep moving forward, go be a doctor, go be an engineer. We fought the revolutions, we signed the petitions, we went to the conferences, it can't change. And then when people rose up in Tunisia, there was a mental shift. There was a reframing and redefining of what was possible. And then Egypt happened. And even though it's step 1, step 2 of the revolution, people are still fighting against the SCAF government and the attack on essentially equal rights. It's important that it's happening. So this is called Revolution, and it goes out to all the people rising up across the Arab world. I get parched. I want to try one without a mic. Don't be fooled by the eyebrows. I'm not that loud. There's 2 of them now. I see some ladies with with the lighting, it's dark in the back, so sometimes they're like caterpillars running at each other. It was messed up. I moved to New York City, and they're like, "Are you Italian?" I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Can't deal with this. Revolution. You were told no. Stop complaining, keep your head down, walk forward, smile when spoken to. This is just how things are. It could be worse, it could be over there, it could be back the way it was, but it can't be what you're thinking. They're too powerful, too brutal, too supported by the West, Saudi, Israel, broker deals to keep you down and your resources out cheap. Don't stand up, resist, reject, must respect status quos that keep you imprisoned, you're outspoken, tortured, your economy pillaged. In the West, so-called moderates reinforced propaganda, working within a system that worked them into nicer houses, brought them $100,000 galas and one-on-ones with war criminals who will be written about in the next edition of a people's history. The youth rose up, labor spoke up, pessimists, former pan-Arabists and pragmatists took the squares, they took over squares, chanting down with Ben Ali, down with Mubarak, down with the regime, rewriting conventional wisdom with a dreamer's pen. It is not too late. We are not free enough. He may be better than his father, but less evil is still evil. Ruled, squashed, pummeled, broken, backed up against walls, skull smashed, repainting sidewalks, stabbed in squares, hung in courtyards. Keep your head down. It's no longer a solution. From Tahrir to Occupy Wall Street, people are redefining authority by asserting communities as leaders. We are the future. And that is not a campaign slogan, but a lifestyle that sees snapping fists as a catalyst to resistance, shaking off rulers, corrupt Arab neighbors, leagues of dictators, U.S. imperialism, Israeli hegemony, and old guard dog egos who are bruised by their failures. Revolution doesn't come easy. The world is watching. Much of the world is working against you. Remember that. But you are a people's movement. Your resolve is a revolution. Much of the world is standing with you. Remember that. Screw you off mic, people. I'm like, straight up winded. I was like, I was at the gym on the P-Court machine watching Judge Judy or something. I don't know. Sarah Bareilles, straight up. A kid I know did a video with Winter Song during the Gaza war. And I can't hear that song anymore. It's really, so I'm going to do this poem next. I wasn't going to do this poem, but it's for Sarah. No, it's for you. Yeah. I'll talk about this too. Poetic Injustice, Writings on Resistance in Palestine. It's happy, first collection of work. We're selling it for $15. You don't want to pick it up online because it's more expensive there. And look at this. What do we got here? You're like, feels weird in the back. There's a CD there. So if you're stuck at a red light, it's a snowy day in Minnesota, you're bumping that and they're like, damn, Amy's angry in the next car. Nope, just Remi on the radio. My mom says if you buy that, it actually triples in value. She said it's like a Mickey Mantle. My mom does not know who Mickey Mantle is, but she loves me. The next poem I'm going to do is called The Poem for Gaza. Shit, I got 25 minutes. I'm talking for a half an hour. Okay. I don't know. Okay, so this is a poem for Gaza. I haven't done this in a while. I hope I remember it, but I wrote it after... or during, I think, the war on Gaza, where 1,400 Palestinians were killed in 22 days, and when white phosphorus was used against civilian populations in an open-air prison. And, it's a weird thing. The landscape on Palestine is a bit different today than it was 5 years ago, but even trying to get people to recognize, a whole population as human beings, there was this kind of dehumanization. I was living in New York on 9/11 of the Arab population, 1.4 billion Muslims, and there was this kind of rhetoric, we got to go and turn that place into a parking lot, we got to go nuke them and start over. And it wasn't coming from the Ann Coulter types, but it was coming from kids in the community, people that I looked toward, and it was a really hard time. And This is called a poem for Gaza, and it goes out to all the family members who had somebody that was lost or injured or subsequently thrown in jail or put in a wheelchair. I never knew death until I saw the bombing of a refugee camp. Craters filled with disfigured elbows and splattered torsos, but no sign of a face. The only impression a fading scream. I never understood pain until a 7-year-old girl clutched my hand, stared up at me with soft brown eyes, waiting for answers. I didn't have any. I had dry pens in my back pocket that couldn't fill pages of understanding or resolution. In her other hand, she held the key to her grandmother's house, but I couldn't unlock the cell that caged her older brothers. They said, "We slingshot dreams so the other side will feel our father's presence." A craftsman built homes in areas where no one was building. And when he fell, he was silent. A .50 caliber bullet tore through his neck, shredding his vocal cords, too close to the wall. His hammer must have been a weapon. He must have been a weapon. Encroaching on settlement hills and demographics. So his daughter studies mathematics. 7 explosions times 8 bodies equals 4 congressional resolutions. 7 Apache helicopters times 8 Palestinian villages equals silence and a second Nakba. Our birth rate minus third birth rate equals 1C and 400 villages re-erected. 1 state plus 2 peoples. And she can't stop crying. Never knew revolution or the proper equation. Tears at the pages with her fingertips, searching for answers but only has teachers. Looks to the sky and sees stars of David demolishing squalor with hellfire missiles. She thinks back words and memories of his last hug before he turned and fell. Now she pumps dirty water from wells while settlements divide and conquer. And her father's killer sits beachfront with European vernacular. She thinks back words while they think back words of obscene notions and indigenous confusion. This is our land, she said. She's 7 years old. This is our land, she said. And she doesn't need history books or a schoolroom teacher. She has these walls, this sky, her refugee camp. She doesn't know the proper equation, but she sees my dry pens, no longer waiting for my answers, just holding her grandmother's key, searching for ink. All right, those are all like love poems. Let's do some angry shit. Wow, chicka, wow, wow. Oh, who likes the war in Iraq? I'm going to try to squeeze in 4 more. I don't know how that's going to happen, but we're going to try to do it. Having this conversation with this guy. That's cool. He was Arab. I was like, oh, 1 for 1. This is starting nicely. And he was like, we need to end the war in Iraq. And I was like, yeah, we do. And he's like, because it costs us too much money. And I was like, no. We need to end the war in Iraq because killing 1 million people, creating a refugee population of 5.5 million, and dumping depleted uranium on civilian populations creates mass graves and cancer. And there's this crazy liberal idea that we should pull out of Iraq because it costs us too much money or we can't pay for our college. Like, you shouldn't bomb the shit out of people. Like, that's like 1 + 1. Like, and like, do you bomb people in the sandbox? No, you don't. Why? Because like somebody would yell at you if you bomb somebody in the sandbox. So this is called Iraq, and you know, we live in a country that acts like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan doesn't exist anymore. You know, if people aren't coming back in coffin boxes, if it's not costing $1 trillion, it's like you see people taking to the streets and it's like, we don't have healthcare, we don't have education. I'm like, really? Like, you don't think spending $2 trillion to bomb indigenous people like really cuts into that? That's not the reason you should stop it. This poem explains what I think in a very loving way. Oh, and this kind of also goes out to the people like the guy in Kentucky that waves a Confederate flag and drives the pickup truck, and he's like, you should go back to where you came from. I'm like, that's weird, John Smith. I didn't know you were indigenous to Kentucky. Huh. So I guess I lost that document that you sent me. So this is called Iraq. Angry people, come on. Iraq has a $79 billion surplus. We've spent more than $1 trillion on this war. More than 4,000 of our troops have died. God knows how many are coming back limbless. Others with post-traumatic stress disorder. This is not making us safer. This is not within our interests. This is what he says to me. An Arab American, an American Arab, an American who happens to be Arab. I look back at him. I'm not some mainstream CNN producer, and 3 Iraqis have died since our conversation started. I'm not an American. I'm a human being. I don't write poems about Kevlar vests or USO tours, and don't get me wrong, I support the troops. The ones in Iraq, Palestine, Afghanistan, Northern Ireland, South Africa, and Birmingham, and not all their bullets fit in guns. They've written poetry and music and literature an oppressor could never dream of. I do. I feel bad that I can't afford my new Android, but I've yet to hear you utter that more than 1 million Iraqis have been slaughtered in this war, that their $79 billion surplus can't even get them electricity or stability, that the surge has failed. Baghdad has been cleansed of Sunnis, and more than 5 million have been made refugees. I'm sorry that you can't afford your cross-country road trip because gas costs too much money and the US dollar can't get you past Go and Monopoly. We wrap ourselves around 50 stars and lapel pins while civilians and occupied nations die because of our policy. If that makes me anti-American, hood me, rip me from my home, and waterboard me in a Guantanamo prison, I am not looking for the American dream or your silly notion of exceptionalism. You think because you love a country, it excuses jingoism. Your so-called rights and interests matter more than the countless deaths of others, and you know what? I'm not going to call you a sellout or Arab Uncle Tom. I'm going to call you what you are, a shitty human being, one that chides a right, invokes civil movements, all while taking a step backwards. Yes, Iraq has cost us $1 trillion, but there's no currency to replace your thirst for hegemony. I'm not an American. I'm a human being. If that's so hard for you to stomach, maybe you should grab a plane ticket with your frequent flyer miles and move the hell out of my country. Yeah. Whoa. It's freaking cold in the UK. I don't sweat at all there. The sun sets at 4 o'clock. It's like the sky is grounding them. Seriously, I understand why they colonized the world, because it's like so dark and miserable there. It's like, if I had that kind of shitty weather, I'd want to steal somebody else's stuff too. Just kidding. If you see that on YouTube, Brits. Oh, what are we going to do? I don't know. I did that. All right. We're going to do these 3. We're going to, I'm going to talk about Palestine a little bit. I'm going to squeeze in these. Yay, I love Palestine. And, I always tell people, like, I'm not a nationalist. I was saying it before, like, when I came into, let me try to do this. Nah, I'm going to do this one next. When I came into Palestine, I was reading a lot of the BS biased media, you know what I mean? Like, and kind of like, well, we have to be reasonable and we have to be pragmatic. And the funny thing is like, reasonable and pragmatic equated to like giving up Palestinian rights. And it's like this crazy notion that if you're more, quote, moderate, it's going to make racist less racist. That's a bunch of bullshit. So this poem's called The Letter. I'm going to do this and then I'm going to switch it up at the end. And, the first show that I did, there was a woman that came up to me and she was like, I just got back from Gaza, and she's like, I'm Jewish, and my best friend's Jewish, and we've been best friends for over 30 years. And so I came back from Gaza and I was telling my friend the experience, and she's like, my friend didn't want to hear it. So I kept pressing her and kept telling her the stories of what I saw. And so finally, her friend was like, I can't talk to you anymore. Like, it's too much. And there were a lot of people that I used to talk to who, if your views didn't fit into their kind of rigid belief system, which equated to giving up Palestinian rights, the phone didn't ring as much. So this is called A Letter. And this goes out to people who I don't talk to as much anymore. And then we'll end with Angry and Angrier. Aww. Shattering stereotypes. Okay. I can make that joke. You can't. It'd be racist if you did it. I'm writing you this letter to tell you that I can't talk to you anymore. Not in the way you want me to. We used to be partners in thought, hands outstretched, drinks thrown back, 2 peas and a pragmatic pod. If only others could see the way we did. But now your face contracts and grimaces, words you can't bear to hear, too harsh for your parents, too normal for mine. I sounded like a bitter refugee, pined on Jaffa, emotions of my grandmother, talk of return and immediate action. I crushed our dreams with rocks of reality, a wounded dove who could no longer swallow hypotheticals when teardrops flooded Gaza like tsunamis. I read so much Chomsky, I didn't want to return. Re-examine my identity after Said's The Question of Palestine finally recognized the need to read a book to be a humanist. Desmond Tutu, Cesar Chavez, Rosa Parks showed me the right of return through action. When I spoke of boycott, you dangled anti-Semitism over my head like blackmail. And how could I shut my art off to dialogue when I created art to start dialogue? But Zinn told me you can't be neutral on a moving train. MLK professed freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And Adrian Rich burned into my memory. The Moment of Change is the only poem. When I said we needed to act, you told me to write more poetry. When I said I wanted my poetry to bring action, you told me my poetry was action. But I come from a family of privilege, a sector of society that never puts its hand out and writes policy for the have-nots. I tried to win hearts and minds, but found that the keys to their hearts were in their hands, opening doors to houses they still carry deeds for. And Jaffa, I'm writing you this letter to tell you that I can't talk to you anymore. But if one day you want to meet again as equals, I'd be more than happy to show you why old men devastate backs and break bones to harvest their own lands. A Mediterranean sunset so magnificent, not even a settler's highest hilltop could imagine its beauty. I can show you perfection in bruised knees, the soft side of calloused palms. I can't show it to you in the way that you want me to. I can only show it to you in the way that it exists. Okay, we have to do a funny one because sometimes when you write a poem, it comes out so goddamn angry that you have to make it funny or else you're going to scare everybody. And it's this called the Do's and Don'ts of Palestine. How many people here know about Palestine? Raise your hand. Oh, Jesus. What am I doing? I'd be doing this poem will not end apartheid. I'm on the organizing committee for the U.S. campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel. I do want you to pick up the Israel bonds pamphlets outside. Here's the thing, I'm an activist. I don't think it's enough just to talk. It is our government that gives $3.1 billion a year in military aid to Israel. It is our government that gives Apache helicopters and Hellfire missiles and cluster bombs and white phosphorus to be used against civilian populations in open-air prisons. It is our government that gives preferential trade agreements. It is our government that allows nonprofit organizations to raise money for illegal settlements on stolen West Bank land. And they have nonprofit status. It's like, hey, want a tax-deductible donation to ethnically cleanse a Palestinian? Here you go. I'm not really a fan of that. This is called the Do's and Don'ts of Palestine. And this is just a nice thing. Because you don't want to be too brown. Don't want to be too angry. You don't want to scare anybody. It is after 9/11. You know what I mean? And you are Palestinian. Those eyebrows are huge. And even though you have a lot of gel in your hair and your T-shirts are too tight, you might scare people. So this is, and I'm going to end with these two, and I'm going to hug off the stage, and we'll be selling the books outside, and you can buy a book, you can hug, handshake, we can do the Mars wave, whatever you guys are into. I saw a Christmas parade, coming down outside of the hotel. That was awesome. Somebody give me a present. I was great. It was people dressed up in lights. I swear to God, if any other person from any other country came, they'd be like, what the hell is wrong with these people? I think it's awesome. Why? Because I'm from Massachusetts. We're used to this. I think we had invented Yankee Candle or something I don't know. So this is called the do's and don'ts of Palestine, and then we're going to end angry. I decided to do the funny one. Okay. Go to a brown person first. Section. No, because these are instructions. Come on, people. Don't call it genocide. We don't want to offend anyone. If we offend them, they'll never listen to us. We have to be reasonable. 1,400, just a number. No names, no death. We want peace, negotiations. Don't mention Zionism. If you mention Zionism, they're going to call you anti-Semitic, and people will believe them. Don't cite Palestinian sources. No one would believe you. I wouldn't believe you. Trust Israeli sources. Don't ever be angry. If you're angry, they're going to call you angry. If you're angry, everyone's going to call you understandably emotional. We have to be pragmatic. Pragmatism is not a euphemism for concessions, although it may feel that way. Don't mention Allah or martyrs. It reminds them of Al-Qaeda and 9/11. It's not your job to fix their ignorance. Don't talk about refugees, boycott, or the one-state solution. If we want to win, we have to compromise. The road to peace is just ahead. Don't. Whatever you do, don't make analogies that include the Holocaust, Nazis, or the Warsaw Ghetto. Only Israelis are allowed to do this when discussing wars on Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. Don't talk about Haifa, Jaffa, Safed, or where your family's from. But if you do, nod when random people say they loved Israel. Doesn't matter where you came from, you can't actually go back. Don't, just don't, and that will lead to doing. Okay. Like, you don't check your watch because you don't want to be that guy, because it was like, but you know, he was like 25 minutes or I will cut you, I will shank you. He didn't say those exact words, but like I felt it. I usually end on this like super duper angry piece because I call it a trifecta poem, and fuck it, dude, we're gonna end on this. And if a lot of this goes over your head, I'm sorry. But I call this a trifecta poem because I get to knock three people. I get to knock Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Barack Obama all in one poem. I'm like, whoa, this is great. Now, we have the Occupy movement, and I've performed and been to maybe 7 or 8 of them, and there have been some nice things. But, like, we need to be pushing things a hell of a lot further. Like, we're at step 1. Like, in the UK, they have these things called austerity cuts. And I say to the Brits, I'm like, guys, at least you have something to cut. Okay, when a student is coming out of Stanford University with $160,000 in debt, can't find a job because there's 9.1% unemployment, even though it dropped to 8.6, decides I'm going to go get a master's, then comes out with $260,000 worth of debt, is temp jobbing for 2 years, then gets a job making $37,000 a year, can't even pay back the minimum on their student loans. That's a problem. We are the richest nation in the world. There are millions of people who work part-time or full-time and fall below the poverty line. That's an issue. You have 50 million plus people without health care. That is an issue. My dad was a doctor, and it's so sad. We look at we don't even look at like education as a right. We don't look at healthcare as a right. We don't look at basic safety nets. And the bullshit Reagan administration, what did we sell people? Well, we have to have free market capitalism, or you'll have 9.1% unemployment like Europe. That worked out well. This has nothing to do with the last poem, but this is called Only as Equals. And it's because I take a lot of shots at this unicorn. It's a unicorn. I call it the American left. You know, it's like we love them, we want it to exist, but you're like, everywhere you look, you're like, I can't find it. Now, we do have leftists, and we do have good things going on. And so I like to pick on these left movements, right? Like they're tens of millions of people. And the funny thing is they have this cousin in Israel called the Israeli left. And for me, yeah, that might hurt some people. Suck it up. For me, it's not about doing what society will tell you to do. It's about doing what's right. When Barack Obama put the goalpost on not at single-payer health care, but like essentially in the Republicans' end zone, like, yeah, no, yeah, or his end zone, I should say. Yeah, no shit, you're not going to get anything in return. When your campaign costs $300 million, chances are you're going to have $300 million worth of favors to pay back. So this is called Only as Equals. Yeah, who's here? Jews Against the Occupation or Jews Say No? IJAN. Okay, awesome, right? We have Israeli leftists too. They're in Boycott from Within and Anarchists Against the Wall. This goes out to the rest. I'm mature. Every time I think of 9/11, I see burning flesh dripping off the bones of Iraqi children in Fallujah. Now Gaza. I tend to memorialize the forgotten, the eclipsing collateral damage of our unpunished crimes, and maybe it's because I'm a numbers guy. Because if I had $1 for every time an Iraqi died since 2003, I'd be a millionaire. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I don't know who to hate more, the governments in the West or the politicians in the East who sell their souls quicker than the oil they export, straw men who use Palestine as a tool to line their pockets and don't give a nickel to their people. Quisling governments who stitch mouths shut for a check from Washington and APEC. How can you be their prototypical anti-Semite if you're signing peace accords to oppress your own people? And then Orientalists and idiots want to talk about how we can't have democracy in the Middle East because of what happened in Gaza. A Hamas boogeyman wrapped in democratic elections. Rahm Emanuel wants to educate me and my people about democracy gone wrong. Why doesn't he try implementing one in Israel first? Instead of bowing down to terrorists like his father in the IDF, lauding a third-rate racist European society that's imploding quicker than its moral standing in the world. Enlightened, like 1950s Afrikaners and slave traders, just because a house is beautiful doesn't mean the bones you built it on have fully decomposed. The Israeli left is about as alive as Ariel Sharon. I'm sick and tired. I am sick and tired of asking for permission to resist from antiquated leftists and progressives who care more about keeping it kosher than moving things forward. I put down my pen and waving fist to resist with college kids and Palestinians, boycott and divest, because honestly, who cares about preserving a living when governments are killing civilians? Complicity by silence and reserve units bombing Gaza. Your academics and scholars, theater groups and practitioners are part of the problem. And if logic doesn't fit into your long-term plan of rejecting my right to return, I'm sorry. Maybe one day you return to reality where my people have babies quicker than Zionists can concoct Jordanian options. I'm not looking for your sympathy or your introspective confessions. Won't sit on my hands until they lose oxygen like the people of Balad and Rafah vote for Barack Obama and pretend that his 22 days of silence was golden, while emaciated children starved to death, surrounded by their parents' corpses. This can't be America the Beautiful. A criminal with a few positive attributes doesn't alleviate genocide. Bombing Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq, it doesn't make you historic. It makes you as blind and bloodthirsty as the white men that came before you. Apathetic hipsters now excited about a president who broke history, but not poverty, occupation, or corporate interests. I'd rather proudly walk through the graveyards of failed peace accords and dialogue sessions than keep seeing my people just as occupied or third-class citizens. We are the gavel that'll slam down like a verdict. I'm not waiting for Israel, America, the Supreme Court to approve it. We'll boycott Leviv, Caterpillar, and your apartheid companies. We're taking back the right of return and keys to a country because we never asked you to go back to Europe or sit in open-air prisons. I'm not asking for your advice. I'm explaining the decision. You can stay here with us, but only as equals. It's not that you're Israeli. It's that you're wrong. That's why I fight for my people.
Thank you, guys.
Oh.